This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp and Bethel School of Technology. David, I read an article recently that cited some data that 58% of Americans call themselves lonely. That number's up. I think the latest data on that would have been 46%. So it's trending the wrong way. What are you hearing? When you hear that data, what pops into your mind as the causes of that upward trend?
Absolutely. It's interesting because it's not just my clients that I'm hearing this from, right? I'm hearing it from friends and family, even myself from time to time. And we're hearing a lot of this loneliness coming from, we're coming out of this pandemic we had where life changed for everyone. It was this big traumatic global experience. And we had distance between ourselves physically. We had distance between ourselves with work. We had distance in every aspect of our lives. And as we've tried to grow into this new world of technology, this new world of how we relate to people, it's harder and harder to connect. And we can point to all kinds of different things, including technology, social media, the news, work from home culture. But what I'm seeing a lot of is even in spaces where people are around others, right? Even in spaces of going to concerts or hanging out with friends, going out to dinner, people are still experiencing this epidemic of loneliness.
Do you see in the data, is loneliness more of an issue at work for women or men, or is it just undecipherable as far as which way maybe one group handles it?
I mean, so Harvard has done research on this. There's been Gallup polls. There's been research from the American Psychiatric Association, and they all find slightly different things based on who they're talking to. Right now, it looks like the biggest population is younger adults between like 19 and 30, 35. Those who are kind of just establishing themselves in a career. The career world looks totally different now than it did 5-10 years ago. But also, single mothers report lots of loneliness with work. Adults that are getting ready for retirement, like towards the end of their work experience, are reporting lots of loneliness. And all for different factors, right? Different reasons.
What do you think is driving the single mother loneliness?
I think a lot of that comes from challenges with connecting with friends and people outside of work, right? If you're a single mother and you're working full time and taking care of children full time, which is a whole other job, right? Like you're working 2 full-time jobs.
Oh, no question.
So who do you engage with? And if you don't have the support system and you don't have the friends that you can engage with, it makes that harder. And those breaks you're taking at work, whether it's lunch or a 5-minute break in between, a lot of times that's being spent caring for children, caring for a household, right?
I think we got to find a way to support these single moms because to the extent that you can help them create community at work, it's pouring back into them, and they're not just always pouring out. They can't give what they don't have. But boy, if you can somehow find a way to support them, you're talking about superheroes.
Absolutely. I mean, these are people who can do 20 different things at the same time, right? Like we're talking incredible people, incredible employees.
Right. Their mental fortitude, their strength is off the charts. It's interesting. Just a quick observation there. The other question I have is leaders. Leadership, you've heard this for decades. I've been in the leadership space and I've heard leaders say it. I've talked to leaders about it, how lonely it is. Thoughts about leaders and how they avoid the loneliness. What is unique about their situation that they need to be aware of that would help them avoid it?
Well, I think part of the reason why it's so challenging for leaders is because there's a necessary level of boundaries between leaders and the people that they're managing, right? The people that they're leading. You can't get too close because then that can bring up some nepotism issues. It can bring up issues with productivity and challenges with discipline, right? So it makes it harder to be a leader. So one, being aware of that and recognizing that it's okay to have those boundaries, but you also need to find ways to connect. And your idea from earlier of having kind of a simple, goofy question at the beginning of meetings, I think can be really powerful for leaders because it's helping the people you're managing, right? It's helping them connect. It's helping them connect to you on a personal level. And it's helping you kind of understand the people you're working with better, right? So asking a fun question, getting to know people, it kind of breaks down some of those barriers while still maintaining a level of boundaries. You're not talking about issues that you shouldn't be talking about at work. Um, and I also encourage managers talk to each other, talk to other managers, talk to other people leaders who are going through similar things and can relate in that level. Because you don't have to manage alone. You don't have to be in charge alone.
Yeah. I want to switch gears just a bit on this because this is really at the core of our entire conversation, that there still remains a massive stigma out there around the idea of just going, I'm not okay right now. I'm not okay. It feels as though maybe the younger generation is more open to therapy and getting professional help. Do you see that? Is that true? Is there, because if you look at the workplace, you've got Gen Z, millennials is the largest demographic in the workforce, then my generation, Gen X, and then of course we've got the boomers. Is there data that shows more acceptance of therapy? In other words, a professional that I can actually say, I'm not broken and messed up, but I need help. I'm not healthy. What do you see on the views of therapy these days?
There's definitely been an improvement in the decrease in stigma, people talking more about mental health and therapy in general. We see that largely in the Gen Z population, right? A lot of Gen Z has been through so many traumatic events at young ages, right? That talking about mental health and the challenges of mental health and therapy has kind of become second nature. It's just a part of life, as it should be. Right? I'm a huge advocate that everyone should have the opportunity to access therapy. Everyone should talk about their emotional experiences. We saw so much more discussion about mental health post-pandemic, as people were like, wow, that really struck me. I really had a hard time with that. I need to talk about it.
Yeah.
And as you see more people talking about it, as you see this conversation becoming part of our popular, vocabulary, we're going to see more and more people being able to reach out for support.
But I know that I tend to isolate and thus feel lonely when I keep my feelings of doubt in the skating rink in this dome here. It feels as though like that's the whole deal. Like we can feel lonely in a nanosecond when we isolate in our thoughts and feelings and we don't get them out. Is this true?
Absolutely. Keeping it to ourselves is a breeding ground for doubt, anxiety, imposter syndrome, right? That's where this thrives, because when it's all to yourself and inside and you're not talking about it, your brain runs away with all of these false narratives, all these things. You're looking for reinforcement for these negative beliefs. So 10 things can happen that say, you're a good person, you're a hard worker, you're doing well at what you're doing, right? But all it takes is one thing where you mess up or you didn't do as well as you wanted to, or someone makes a comment. And that if you don't talk about it, that can get stuck and play on loop in our systems, in our brains, in our emotions. And then that increases doubt. It breeds doubt and insecurity.
Yeah. I mean, I cannot tell you how many calls I've taken over the years where someone has got a micromanager above them, and it's excruciating, and it drives so much negativity in the workplace. I think it's one of the deadly sins of leadership. I really believe that, and so I was talking about it to me, and I want you to correct any of this. This is just from my experience. You're the pro here. I think at the core of micromanagement is fear. They are attempting to get control of something that they fear they don't have control over. And so thus the micromanagement. That's my take. Correct, clean up any of this. It won't hurt my ego at all. However, here's what happened. The thing goes bananas, goes viral. 10 million people, 40,000 comments. It's nuts, right? And so it said to me, I was like, this is still a massive nerve. So to that end, I want to look at this two ways from the counselor here, okay? Number one, let's talk to the leader first. What is a leader who might acknowledge today there's somewhat healthy? I think I might be micromanaging. I'm hearing some buzz from the team. I'm a little bit too controlling here. What would you counsel them to do? What would be the thing that you would be diving in with them on?
I would definitely talk to them first about where that's coming from. Because I think you're absolutely right that a lot of micromanagement comes from this idea of perfectionism, comes from if I'm following all these steps, that's the best way to do it. And the fear of what's going to happen if it's not done right? What's going to happen if these people that are working for me can't do it? And I would want to challenge leaders on this idea that that's what teams are for, to engage and do things. And part of your job is to kind of teach and educate. And if there's something going off track, that's when you can step in. But micromanaging and taking on all those pieces is a surefire way for burnout for you, surefire way for burnout for your employees. And you're not going to get the best work. The best work comes from people who have that creative freedom, have that ability to kind of govern themselves to an extent. And, just to throw it out there, because I know some of the feedback when we talk about micromanaging is, oh, well, I have an employee who just doesn't do the work and can't do it.
Right.
And if that's the case, then work with that employee specifically. Like this idea of punishing everyone with the way you approach things doesn't work. It never has, and it never will.
That's exactly right. David Yadush's input is general psychological information based on research and clinical experience. It's intended to be general and informational in nature. Also, just because you might have heard something on the show that sounds similar to what you're experiencing, beware of self-diagnosis. Diagnosis is not required to find relief, and you'll want to find a qualified professional to assess and explore diagnosis, if that's important to you. If you or your partner are in crisis and uncertain of whether you can maintain safety, please reach out for support. Crisis hotlines, local authorities. Have a safety plan. That can be done with a therapist too. Launch your tech career today at betheltech.net/Ken Coleman.